Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're drawing a hard line around exactly what is and, honestly, just as importantly, what isn't included in the iron and steel producers industry. When we look at sustainability data, we really need to know exactly what we're measuring. The International Sustainability Standards Board, through the SASB standards, has created a hyper-specific framework for this sector. And right now, we're going to unpack exactly how they define it. So let's dive right into this deceptively simple question because it completely changes how we measure sustainability in this sector. Think about it. If a company pulls iron from the earth, smelts it into steel, and then ships it around the world, how do we evaluate their environmental and social footprint fairly against a company that, say, just buys scrap metal to melt down? Well, the secret lies in drawing a very strict operational boundary. Here's our roadmap for today: defining the steel industry, inside the boundary box, the mining exclusion, measuring inside the lines, sourcing and supply chains, and finally, why boundaries matter. Section 1. Defining the steel industry, setting the baseline. Okay, here's our core focus. Processing and distributing steel, that's in. But digging the ore out of the ground, that is decidedly out. The SASB standard draws a really strict perimeter here. Basically, if you're manufacturing or distributing, you're inside the box. But if you're out there extracting raw minerals, you are operating entirely outside of it. Section 2. Inside the boundary box. Who are we measuring? The crucial point to remember is that this standard covers a wide but highly specific spectrum of the supply chain. We're talking about the primary iron and steel mills producing your flat-rolled sheets and pipes. It includes the foundries casting the metal, who usually buy their iron and steel from other folks. But importantly, it also captures metal service centers and merchant wholesalers, the entities actually distributing, importing, or exporting these ferrous products. Now, inside these mills, production relies primarily on two distinct furnace methods, and both of these are measured within our box. You've got the basic oxygen furnace, which takes iron ore as a primary input, and the electric arc furnace, which leans heavily on scrap steel. The choice between these two processes is a really big deal. It massively influences whether a company relies on direct fossil fuels or purchased grid electricity, which, as we'll see, totally changes their sustainability metrics down the line. Section 3. The mining exclusion rule, drawing a firm line. So, you're probably wondering, where does the mining actually go? Well, it gets its own formal framework to ensure absolutely nothing is ignored. The iron and steel producers boundary explicitly kicks out the mining of ore. If a company mines, that specific activity falls under a completely separate standard, metals and mining, or EMM. The iron and steel standard is explicitly designed around this operational reality. Because, let's face it, most steel entities do not dig their own ore out of the earth. Keeping these boundaries intensely focused on production prevents massive data distortions. It lets us fairly compare, say, a foundry in Ohio with a wholesaler in Germany, entirely on a level playing field. Section 4. Measuring inside the lines sustainability topics. Because this is an industry that relies on extreme heat and really heavy machinery, the standard zeroes in on the day-to-day realities of mill and foundry operations. It lays out 7 key disclosure areas, spanning everything from greenhouse gas emissions and air quality all the way to supply chain management. We are tracking the gritty realities of the factory floor here. That means measuring Scope 1 emissions and very specific air pollutants, like particulate matter and carbon monoxide. We're tracking whether those furnaces are fed by the electrical grid or direct coal, and we're keeping a close eye on the massive amounts of waste generated, stuff like slag and hazardous electric arc furnace dust. Take safety, for example. It's measured using a universal 200,000-hour baseline. Now, why that exact number? Well, it perfectly represents 100 full-time workers putting in 40 hours a week for 50 weeks a year. It is a completely brilliant way to standardize incident rates inside our box regardless of how big or small the company is. Section 5. Sourcing and supply chains, managing outside risks. Now, here is the vital bridge. While a steel mill doesn't actually extract the coking coal or the iron ore, the standard holds them absolutely accountable for the risks hidden in their supply chain. Iron ore mining and coal production are incredibly resource-intensive, and they can severely impact local communities, workers, and ecosystems. Producers must actively manage these extraction risks. Think about it. If a mining supplier faces a massive community protest or gets hit with a regulatory shutdown over environmental damage, this steel producer faces immediate supply constraints. So the standard requires them to detail exactly how they manage these risks through strict supplier screening, enforced codes of conduct, and rigorous audits. The bottom line? You don't have to mine the ore, but you absolutely have to prove you're buying it responsibly. Section 6. Why industry boundaries matter. The value of precision. These strict definitions mean that when you evaluate a steel company, you are getting pure production and distribution data. If SASB had blurred the lines, a company's massive emissions from a mining operation might totally obscure the incredible energy efficiency they just achieved at their steel mill. By pushing mining into the EMM standard and reserving EMIS purely for mills, foundries, and wholesalers, investors can finally make true apples-to-apples comparisons. So, the next time you sit down to review a sustainability report for a major manufacturer, ask yourself, are you looking in the right box? Understanding exactly where the line is drawn between extraction and production is truly the only way to decode the data. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the boundaries of the data you consume.